Greetings and welcome to this video on getting started with Bootstrap 5. If you were here for the last videos in this series, then you're up and running with Bootstrap and you've got a good handle on how the Bootstrap grid works. In this video, we're going to look at some of Bootstrap's utility classes. We'll start with an explanation of what I mean when I talk about utility classes, and then we'll go through a number of Bootstrap's more commonly used utilities, namely colors, borders, spacing utilities, which are margin and padding, and some text utilities. I'll do a number of demonstrations along the way, and those will be available in CodePens for your convenience, improvement, or destruction. Feel free to fiddle with them all you like and use them as a learning tool to figure out how you can make Bootstrap's utility classes work for you. What do I mean by a utility class? A utility class is a type of CSS class that does one thing. It has one job, and typically we would give it a name that clearly describes what it does. For example, you may have a class that changes the color of your text to a dark color, and you might call it text-dark. One key advantage of using utility classes is that they can be reused in your HTML on just about any item that that particular class would be appropriate on, without having to add new classes to your style sheet. You just slap that class name into the HTML and you're good to go. We've actually seen a number of utility classes already in this video series, and I'm going to use one of those for our demonstration, which is background color. To start, I'll go into CodePen. I'm going to open up a browser, go to codepen.io. I'm signed into my account already, but if you sign in or get an account of your own, you'll be able to follow along exactly. And I'm going to make a new pen. To start off with, I'm going to make a div, and I'll give it some content. And I'll put a class attribute in here with the class name of my BG warning. In the CSS portion, I'll just copy and paste that. And this is going to have a background color of yellow. When CodePen updates, you can see now the background color on that div is yellow. And that's a totally classic utility class. So it does one thing, and it's totally clear based on the name what it does. And I could reuse this on any element which is capable of having a background color, which is going to be just about any element. But how does this relate to Bootstrap? Well, Bootstrap gives you a ton of utility classes to work with. So let's see one of those right now. I'm going to just copy and paste what I have here already, remove the my part of the class name, so it's BG warning, and that's a Bootstrap class. And next I'm going to go into the Bootstrap documentation and go back to that getting started page where we can copy a link to the CDN for Bootstrap's CSS resources. I'm going to put that link into this CodePen. And by the way, there's actually a better way of getting Bootstrap into your CodePen, but for this particular tutorial, I'm not going to worry about that. Well, whatever, maybe I'll go into it. You would go into this little thing here and paste the link to your preferred CDN into this section. But that's a bit less transparent or less explicit, so I'm going to keep the link in the HTML. Okay, so now you can see that we've got our second row there with content, and it's got background color of maybe yellow, maybe orange, I don't know. On my browser it actually looks pretty orange, but in any event, it's this color. What's going on behind the scenes to make this happen? Well, it looks pretty much like we've already seen. Going into the developer tools, we can see there's that class, BG warning, that's the Bootstrap class, and all it does is set the background color to this, orange. But here's a question, why not call this class BG yellow or BG orange or whatever that color is? Why call it BG warning? Well, Bootstrap classes are named by their function and not by the typical name of the color, and that makes them more versatile. So the idea is that this orangey color is kind of a warning color. Look out, slow down, whatever. If I wanted to subtly change that color or change it to a totally different color, I could do so without changing the name of the class. And if I've got multiple references to BG warning in my HTML, I can change the color that BG warning represents without having to go through all the HTML and update the class name. On the other hand, if you were to have left the class name as something like, say, BG yellow, and then later you want your warning color or whatever thing that color was for to be blue or green or whatever the case may be, then you would have either to change the name of the class, or you would have a class which is named in a way that just doesn't make any sense. It's BG yellow, but the color it creates is green. Some Bootstrap utility classes are meant to be used in combination with others. As an example of that, let's look at the border classes. On this bottom element, I'm going to type in here, let's see, border dark. So this would be a class to make a dark border. And what happens? Nothing. Let's look at the developer tools. What do we have here? There's border dark, and it sets a border color to this dark color. But we haven't told this element that it's supposed to have a border in the first place. So to do that, we add the class of border. And we'll see it updates now. There's actually a dark border. And together, border plus border dark will create a 1 pixel solid dark colored border. Why divide border color from the border class? Well, the answer is similar to what we saw before. This way we can use the same border color class on different borders. There are border classes in Bootstrap for border top, border bottom, border right, border left. And by dividing the border color from those border classes, we can apply the same color to any one of those borders, border top, bottom, right, left, without having a whole new style rule for that. So again, this makes our utility classes a bit more versatile. Utility classes are a type of CSS class that's distinct from component classes. We already saw an example of a component class in the first video in this series, and I'll reproduce that right now. That is the button class. I'm going to give it a class attribute of btn and btn primary. Let's take a closer look at this guy. As we saw previously, the button class, being a component class, is a composite of various style declarations, display property, font weight, line height, etc. And then it's got this modifier class which provides a color for the text, background color, and a border color. And then there are also other classes involved for the hover state and the active state. So altogether, this is a Bootstrap component built out of Bootstrap component classes, and they are distinct from this much more simple single-purpose utility class. That sums it up for the preliminaries. Let's start writing code. I'm going to start by opening up the folder we created previously in Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to create a new HTML file based on the template we have here. So I'll just copy and paste it and rename this guy to utilities.html. I'll add a link to our style sheet, styles.css. And update the title and h1. To start things off, I'll make a container, and inside of it a row with 1 column. Inside the column a paragraph, and inside the paragraph some content. Just to make sure everything's working out here, let's open this guy up in Live Server, and here we are. To begin with, I'm going to take a really quick run through the color classes in Bootstrap. So I'm going to give the paragraph here a background color, this time of primary. As you can see, again, this blue background color is not named blue, it's named primary. We've gone into that a little bit already, but I'm going to go into the Bootstrap documentation and we'll get a bit more information about this. So go to getbootstrap.com, into the docs, and under utilities, there's a tab for colors. And these are the colors that come built into Bootstrap by default. These names are not totally crystal clear, but fairly straightforward. Primary refers to the main color for the site. Secondary is the second main color for the site, I suppose. By default, primary is blue, text secondary, or the secondary color generally is gray. You can redefine those in your external style sheet so they can be basically whatever color you want. And you can also change them in Sass, that is the CSS preprocessor that creates Bootstrap's CSS files, to customize Bootstrap's color classes without having to override those color classes in an external style sheet. Moving down the list, success is your affirmative color. You might throw it on a button where you want someone to take positive action, or on an alert that indicates some successful action. Danger is a bit of your stop, look out color. Warning, yellow, slow down, whatever. info, light, dark. There's a number of them there, and they're all named by function, not by the typical color name. I'll just run through a few of these by way of demonstration. So let's see what success looks like. Hit save, and there we go, it's green. Let's try info, light blue, danger, whoop, I misspelled it, so nothing happened, danger, red. Last, I want to show this background dark, which creates this dark color. And as you can see, it also is the same color as our content text. So when I don't have that selected, you can't see it. This leads me into another Bootstrap utility class, which is handy, and these are text classes. So I'm going to make this text light, and as you can imagine, it makes a light colored text, which you can then see on a dark colored background. And the same color classes, or the same color variables, apply to text utilities as to background utilities. So let's throw on text warning, and we've got yellow text, danger, red. We've also already seen the border properties, but I'll just run through some of those right now. Now, you can't barely see it here, but there actually is a border on that. Yeah, there it is. If we zoom right in, it's a very light colored gray border. You can change the border colors. You can change the border thickness. Say border 3 and see what happens. So it's a bit thicker now. Now let's see how high does that go. Back into the Bootstrap docs, and it'll give me the information all the way up to 5. So let's see how thick border 5 is going to be. Pretty good. And you can also change the border radius. So let's go with border rounded. Just going to go rounded, hit save. Oh yeah, and the corners, if we zoom right in, you can see they are now rounded, although it's pretty subtle. Another nice one is rounded pill. Yeah, I like that. And we can also change which side of an element has a border. So let's see what happens when we say border bottom. Hit save. Oh, nothing. I got that wrong. I see. Okay, so I've got border and border bottom, and I shouldn't have those two together. Border will put a border on all 4 sides of the object, whereas border bottom will only put it on the bottom. If I remove border, then I will no longer have border on all 4 sides, and it's only remaining on the bottom. Border top, and you'd think border left would do the trick, but it doesn't, because in Bootstrap 5, they have changed from using the right and left lingo to using start and end. So if I put border start, we'll see there's a border on the start there. I'm actually going to make a larger border so it's a bit easier to see. The border is at the start of the row, which in most circumstances is going to be the left-hand side. If I use border end, then the border will change to being at the end of the row, or typically the right-hand side. The reason Bootstrap has moved away from the left and right lingo is that they've added a feature which allows you to change the orientation of your site from right to the left. In most languages, as far as I'm aware, you read from left to right. But some languages are read from right to left, and so you may actually want to totally flip the orientation of a website so that everything is turned around and the eye moves from right to left. Bootstrap allows that now, but as a consequence, they can no longer use that right and left language, and so they've switched to start and end. So far, so good. Next, I'm going to demonstrate spacing classes, which means primarily margin and padding. I'll put a background color of light blue on the row, and I'm going to remove these border classes and add instead my border 2 class. Save that, see if it worked, and it did. And we'll see that I've already got some margin actually underneath the paragraph. And jumping into the developer tools, we can get a closer look at that. The paragraph has margin bottom of 1 rem, and then there's also margins on either side, which I think is coming from the call class. Pardon me, that's a gutter, which is coming from the row class. To simplify matters, I'm going to remove this paragraph entirely, put the content right inside the column, and I'll put my border to class on the column, along with the background color of warning. Hit save, see if it worked. Yes, it did. First of all, I would like to do a demo of margins. So as a quick refresher on the difference between margin and padding, let's take a look at this. I'm going to put margin of 5 on the column, hit save, and we can see that the space now that has been placed around that column is on the outside of it. Margin refers to the space between the element represented by its border and whatever's around it, which in this case is the row. If I were to replace that margin class with a padding class and hit save, now the whole thing is taking up the same amount of space, but a space now has been added internal to the element and is between the content and the edge of the element represented by its border. If I put both margin and padding on the element, then we'll see how it all comes together. Now we've got both space between the content and the outside of the element, and space between the outside of the element and whatever's around it. I'm going to update the content here and call this what it is, which is demo of margin and padding. And for posterity's sake, I'm going to copy and paste this guy twice above and make one of them a demo of margin and one a demo of padding. That's margin and padding in theory. Now let's look at margin and padding in Bootstrap. Let's focus on this second row here, and we see the padding class we have on this row, on this column, is P5. I'm going to break that down now. The P obviously refers to padding, and it doesn't specify whether the padding goes on the top, the bottom, right, left. If you just use a P, or similarly an M, but in the case of padding, if you just use a P, then it will place the padding that you're asking for on all 4 sides of the element. On the other hand, if I were to put on this an S standing for start, watch this row here, the padding has changed quite a bit. So what's happened now is we still have the padding, the same amount of padding on the very start of the row, but we've lost all the rest of the padding on the element. We're only now getting padding start or padding right. Put that back. Now if I put that on the end, hit save. It's actually not a very good demonstration in this case, but over here, just believe me, there is the same amount of padding on the end of the row, but it's not showing up because this row is just too wide and the content is too narrow. Padding top puts the padding on the top, or either PT puts the padding on the top. Padding bottom, or PB, puts the padding on the bottom. And each of those represent a different class in Bootstrap's style sheet. You can also specify the top and bottom at the same time. So if I want to affect padding top and bottom at once, that's the y-axis, and so I use PY, and now I've got the same padding on the top and the bottom. Similarly, I can affect the x-axis, the left and right axis, and hit save, and now I've got the same amount of padding on the left and right. And the exact same thing goes for the margin. So I'll do that demonstration on the first row. Margin MT, margin top, puts the margin on the top. MB puts the margin on the bottom. MS puts the margin at the start. And then ME puts the margin at the end, where M puts the margin on all 4 sides. So that's the first part of these classes. What about the second? -5. So 5 refers to the amount of margin we're asking for Bootstrap to use, where there are options from 0 to 5. And 5 just refers to the level. That doesn't mean 5 rem or 5 pixels or anything like that. It's just one of 5 options. Let's go into the Bootstrap docs and see what's going on here. So again, going to getbootstrap.com, into the docs, under utilities, and under spacing, we'll get our information about margins and padding. And here is where they talk about sizes. 0, your first size means there will be padding and margin set to 0. Size 1 would put the margin or padding to 0.25 or a multiple of 0.25 of the spacer size, and the spacer is kind of a standardized size that Bootstrap uses, which by default is 1 rem. So unless you vary the SAS and change that spacer size, 1 is going to be 0.25 rem. Padding of 2 will be 0.5, padding of 3 will be the size of the spacer, which is 1 rem, padding 4, 1.5, and padding 5 is 3 rem. Minimize that. Let's go into the inspection tools again. On my demo of padding, I've got P5, and we can see the size is 3 rem. I could run through those like this and show you what 1, save, what 2, save, what 3, save, 4, save, and 5 look like, as I just did now. But let's actually build a clearer demonstration again for posterity's sake. And with that in mind, I'm going to create a row, within it a column, and I'm going to make it a call5 class. And within the column, I'm going to make a div, or pardon me, 5 divs, with border 1 and background white. On the row, I'm going to give it background info, and on the columns, I want padding 0 to zero out the padding which comes along with the column class. And I'm doing that because I'm trying to just demonstrate the margin classes by themselves. So on this first one, let's put m, that is margin start, well, 0. Okay, so that's a 0 margin. On the second one, we can put margin start of 1. Save that. You can see it's a little bit farther out. And I'm just going to keep going along, doing exactly this. Margin start 2. Margin start 3. Margin start 4. And I need one more row here, or rather one more div, and that's going to be margin start 5. Well, this is all very nice, but there's one type of margin utility I haven't shown you yet, and that is margin auto. And on the call class here, that's what I'm going to add. So let's start with margin start auto, which sets the margin to auto, so it has the auto CSS property, and that will send the entire thing, that is the entire column, to the left-hand side. So at the start here, the margin took up as much space as was available, and it sends the entire column over to the left-hand side. If I put that as margin end, well, it'll just go back to where it was before. But in some circumstances, you can actually use margin end auto, again, to align the content to the left. And if I want to put auto on both the left and right on the x-axis, I can do that. And let's see what happens. Haha, it's centered. So this is a really handy little tool. You can use MX Auto to set the right and left margins to auto so that they're equal and the element will be centered. However, in this circumstance, having all these items centered kind of ruins my demonstration of the margin sizing properties. So I'm going to put them back to where they are. And now we can more clearly see the variations in margin sizing. This is all well and good, but as we know, sometimes we want the spacing of elements to change at different breakpoints. As you narrow the browser and your website layout changes, the spacing between elements may have to change as well, and thankfully, Bootstrap provides breakpoint responsive spacing classes. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to do yet another row with yet another column. Oops. Yet another column. On the row, I'll give it background color of danger, and on the column, I'll give it background color of info. Save that. Do we have everything? No, we don't, because I need content. Save that. And I'll make it a call auto and center it with MX Auto. Responsive padding looks pretty much the same as what we've already seen, so we'll start with a P, give it a dash, and then instead of going straight to the number, we specify the breakpoint at which we want the layout or the spacing to change. So I'm going to use the MD breakpoint and give it a size 5. So at below MD, it's going to have its default size or its default padding, and then above MD, that padding will expand as we just saw, and it now has 3 rems of padding. So this represents moving into the medium breakpoint where the padding rule is now engaged. We can stack or combine these breakpoint specific classes. So let's give this guy here a class that will engage at the large breakpoint and set padding to 0. Hit save, And we can see we must not be on the large breakpoint, but when we move into it, yes, padding is now set to 0. And when we move back into the medium, it goes to padding 5, or pardon me, 3 rems at padding class 5. And then below medium, it goes down to the default, which is basically very little padding. And that's what this combination of padding classes will do. I'm going to make the content inside this responsive column a little bit more descriptive. And at the top here, I would like to show something I noticed earlier, a little mistake I made in some deletion sometime back there. I managed to get these two closing divs on the same row. I don't want that, and so now that's better. Hit save, and everything is right with the world. We've covered a lot in this video, but we've really only scratched the surface. There's a ton more to learn about Bootstrap's utility classes. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to go ahead and check out the Bootstrap documentation and other resources available, and we'll get some more practice with the classes that we've already seen when we do our final project for this course. If you're enjoying this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you want to learn more about Bootstrap, but you don't want to pull your hair out doing it all by yourself, you may be interested in my courses available on Udemy. In the next video, we'll cover Bootstrap's components, and I look forward to seeing you there.